So for those who are not going to sit in the audience, just ask you to maybe move back a little to continue your conversations, because we're about to have a very serious conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I want to start off, and I am going to introduce our incredible panelists in a moment, but I want to start off by talking about what is unfortunately the hypocrisy of Silicon Valley, if I may be so direct, okay? This libertarian community that professes to have very progressive values, and that has paid a lot of lip service for a very, very long time to being inclusive. And I don't think it's any further from the truth. And there was a period in the wake of the horrific murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor where, as the Black Lives Matter initiative sort of accelerated beyond anybody's imagination, there were a lot of promises made, there were a lot of pledges made. But it feels to me like, unfortunately, in the wake of the pandemic, in the wake of the Ukrainian war, and all of the aftershocks economically, we've seen a lot of backtracking, okay? And I don't mean to just focus on the Black community as the only represented community. I'm equally focused on the Latino community, the LGBTQ plus community, okay? And it's a remarkable thing to me. I'm holding this book by the great Vivek Wadhwa. Some of you may know this book. It's called Innovating Women, right? It took a long time just to allow female founders to access capital in the same way that white dudes like me could, okay? But I think what's happened over the last several years gives me hope, but also tells me we have a long way to go, right? And one of the things that has given me hope is we've seen a lot more diversity-led VC groups and angel syndicates, okay? There's a lot more Black-led, Latino-led, and LGBTQ-led groups focusing on supporting their communities. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of backtracking, that there was some progress that was being made prior to COVID, and it seems like we're sort of resetting the needle back to where we were pre-COVID, right? And that's just crazy to me, right? We are absolutely wanting to make sure every single person that wants to contribute to have full access to capital and support and advocacy to do that, right? And so I wanted to put together a discussion, right? When I joined the DECODE board, I told my colleagues that my mission was to make DECODE much more inclusive. And so this is an example of the kinds of discussions. Some of you may have sat in on my panel this morning on ESG, and Ali Berger was a member of that panel, and Gunnar Huppman, Dr. Gunnar Huppman were wonderful contributors to that panel. So I want to first introduce, Reginald, why don't you just introduce yourself, okay? We'll just go around the horn and let you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm especially to be on this august panel. This is fantastic, and the topic is certainly very timely. I have been in Silicon Valley now about 30 years. Worked for companies such as Cisco and Apple and a couple other startups, and now at Google. And I can tell you that over time, for sure, that there has certainly been times in which the topic of diversity and equity and inclusiveness has been really top of mind for many of these companies. But the problem has been that it's been mostly a moment in time versus a continuous push and continuous drive. And so for myself, on sort of the back end of my career here, I am looking for more opportunities to try to be impactful in this space. So to leverage those, the experience I've had over the years, and try to do what I can to try to assist in that manner as well. So again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Please, I'll grab that. You go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Mike, for having us here. It's a pleasure to be around this group and having this conversation. My name is Lorenzo. Mike mentioned briefly the group I run right now called Gaingels, but I've been a part of the Silicon Valley and venture capital ecosystem for the last 18 years. Started my first company back out here in San Francisco where I was living, ended up selling that business, and I've been pretty much working at the intersection of diversity, representation, visibility for underrepresented communities and the LGBTQ community, which is the community I belong to, and venture capital for that long. Pretty much since 2008, I started a nonprofit at the time called Start Out. I don't know if anybody has come across it, but it's the largest nonprofit organization that supports LGBTQ entrepreneurship within the startup ecosystem. And Gaingels was born originally as a group just that supported the LGBTQ community. In 2018, really started to expand to now be the largest, most active venture investor in the world that supports diversity in the venture capital ecosystem broadly, not just as founders, but also as staff, as governance, as belonging diversity on the cap table, therefore who investors on the, these incredible growth opportunity for generational wealth creation to be open and more accessible to people from all underrepresented groups. We can talk, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but thank you again for having me.
And just so people understand the scale of what you've accomplished so far, the number of portfolio companies you have currently been...
Yeah, we've invested approximately $1 billion in about 1,600 companies in the last 4.5 years.
Extraordinary, okay? I apologize to Brittany because her photo's not here, but she and I literally just got connected in the last 48 hours. And I really wanted to have her voice as a woman, as a black woman, as an entrepreneur who has certainly struggled with some of these issues. So welcome, Brittany, please, if you would.
Thank you, everyone. Really awesome to be here as well. Like Mike said, my name is Brittany. I've been in product management for a decade plus, working at big companies like PayPal and Braintree, very small companies, going through Techstars, ran a small business myself, and then spent the last couple of years building digital banks for underrepresented folks. First with Kinley, which is a digital bank for Black America. Then with Daylight, a digital bank for LGBTQ+.
A portfolio company, or
and now moving on to helping some others as well. But I can definitely tell you my experience as an entrepreneur, being a part of founding teams and going through accelerators, and then some of the crazy shit that people say to me,
Yes.
and other black founders like me, that they do not say to others.
Yeah. And she's going to speak her truth, and we want to hear it because it's important. All right, and Charles is a former student of mine, and it's such an honor to have you in from Lagos, Nigeria, to join us. So please, my friend.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you, everyone. What a wonderful conference. I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot. So I'm Charles. I'm Nigerian by origin. I came in from Lagos. I technically live here as well because my wife is here, so home is where she is. So my background over the last 20 years has been more around the corporate side, across multiple industries, from retail to healthcare to consumer electronics. I work for Procter & Gamble, I work for General Electric, I work for Samsung, I work for DuPont, several geographies. And in 2016, I kind of kissed corporate goodbye and decided to be an entrepreneur, being that most of the time I was involved in entrepreneurship and starting up things in Big Corp. And so I started a Pan-African innovation company where we've kind of worked with ventures to see how we can scale their solutions on the continent. We've worked with about 2,000 ventures in 25 countries so far. Now I'm building my second company, which is focused on climate change and looking at how we can build an infrastructure platform to solve this big problem we call plastic waste. And a cool thing we can talk about, after the conference. But really nice to meet you.
You are an Eisenhower Fellow. Would you explain what that means, please?
So the Eisenhower Fellowship is, of course, by the name, it was set up after President Eisenhower. And it's really to promote, to kind of bring together a group of leaders globally that can promote world peace, justice, and prosperity. It's been running for a very long time, I think since 1957. I was among the African cohort that is focused on climate change. So there are 24 other leaders like me from Africa that was brought into the US, and we spent about 8 weeks looking at the different projects we're doing and speaking with different stakeholders from industry to academia to technology. We were backpacking from state to state. I cannot count the number of meetings I had. We went through about nine states in the US, between the West, the East, the South, and it was remarkable.
And with some incredibly high-level people as
Yes,
well.
absolutely.
All right, so Lorenzo, I'm going to start with you because most of the time when we run these DEI discussions, for better or worse, the LGBTQ perspective doesn't seem to be included. So today you are here, and by the way, this man flew in from New York this morning, had to put up with, he's an Italian, he's from Milano, you would not know it because he speaks perfectly unaccented English, but if anybody knows coffee, an Italian man from Milano knows coffee, and he had to put up with some really shitty coffee, so let's make this worth our while, okay? So you have an extraordinary story, and as someone who went to the University of Texas at Austin, thank God an Oasis, and it wasn't Dallas or Fort Worth, God forbid, right? That would have been really, really tough. You had a vision. And you started with this nonprofit that has evolved over time into something that has gone well beyond embracing and supporting the LGBTQ community to building a global ecosystem for all underrepresented groups. So take us through the evolution of how that vision has been manifest and where we are today.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack, so I'll try to be brief. But fundamentally, I had enormous privilege coming to the U.S. as a white guy from Europe, arriving in the U.S. just a few months before the attack on September 11 happened. At the time, I wasn't out. One of the sort of trope kind of things that happened was that it gave me a push out of the closet because life is too short and something could happen tomorrow. But the other thing is that it gave me a first look to the kind of othering that I maybe had not been sort of, such in front of my face up until that moment. People questioning people just because they were immigrant, all of a sudden, what's your visa status? Why are you here? And the things that were being told to friends or people that I knew who were not white or who were Arab Americans or immigrants from Muslim countries were terrible. And it kind of stayed with me in a sense. When I got to start my first company and kind of became entrenched into the venture capital ecosystem, Silicon Valley, the enormous innovation engine that was here and the flourishing of ideas, it became also really apparent that it was a very closed system, that it basically relied practically on social networks, and these social networks existed through socioeconomic pools that relied on financial educational institutions and networks and left a lot of people out. And especially when you came to the LGBTQ community, if you started to get outside of those of us who could quote unquote pass, and certainly people that were people of color within the LGBTQ community, people that manifested gender in a different way, the inaccessibility to those networks was even more pronounced. Startout was born really as a way to, I remember having conversations with a few of my friends who were also entrepreneurs, founders, members of the LGBTQ community who, unlike me, for whatever reason, better or worse, once I actually came out of the closet, it was, sort of a one-way only. They were in the closet with their boards, with their investors, with their employees sometimes, and when you're a founder, you've got so many things that you're worried about. The last thing that you need to worry about is sort of how to live a double life, kind of like how to present yourself in one way. And remember having conversations with them. And this was 2007, 2008, somewhere around those lines, which people maybe, I don't know how many people were here and remember that, but things were actually quite different than they are right now. They were not, by any way as bad as they were in the 90s, but they were very different. And they all of them said the same thing, which was, well, I have a very clear sense of what I have to lose, but I don't know what I have to gain from, taking that risk. And in a sense, what we did or what we wanted to do with Startout was to create something to gain. Effectively, a social network of support that could open doors, that could teach, that could provide education, that could provide mentorship, that could provide sort of the direct perspective of experience from others that share that same life challenges, those same life experiences, and so on. And it became something that was very successful. In a sense, it's now the largest nonprofit that supports the community within the ecosystem. It has 35,000 members around the country, an incubator that has brought on cohorts of companies that have raised more than $1 billion in total and minted one unicorn company. So amazing. But there was so much more that needed to be done. And when we started Gaingels, which was originally a small angel group that was directly investing capital within the LGBTQ community, something that started out as a nonprofit was not going to do, was not set up to do, we also realized that the progress that had been made when it came to other communities of color or even women entrepreneurs had been inconsistent at best and insufficient at worst. And we needed to do something that could scale and have a much broader impact. I heard people before this talk, I think people were having a conversation around Web 3.0. And the metaverse. I often talk about what Gaingels is trying to do as creating venture capital 3.0. And what I mean by that is venture capital 1.0, we're talking about the 70s, right? 70s, 80s. The model just kind of got started, and it was a small group of incredibly privileged people that realized that there was a unique way of creating innovation and value by investing in certain type of companies that had a certain profile of needing capital early on to grow very fast and create very rapid change. That turned out to be very successful. Venture Capital 2.0 is probably what all of you have experienced and are experiencing right now, which was great, that worked really well. Let's do more of the same. So it's basically a scaling up of that model. And it was the same people from the same group, from the same social networks, from the same educational systems, from the same universities, effectively trying to do a lot more pattern recognition. It's like, oh, that person has been great before. Let's find other people exactly like that person to do more companies. That also worked out really well. It has created enormous...
For many people. Worked out
For
not
many,
for
well,
everybody.
right.
Yeah.
But it has created probably, arguably the biggest, largest innovation engine and value creation engine in American economy, and to some extent exported that model to the entire world. What we're trying to do is to say, how do we take that and scaling out horizontally, right? How do we create more participation? How do we break down those network of access so that not only more founders from underrepresented communities, from all communities, get access to capital, but also we create a real pipeline. Someone was mentioning before Latino participation in the tech industry. How do we create a pipeline for talent to actually get into venture-backed companies? Because guess what? The single most direct predictor of whether or not someone will start a venture-backed company is whether or not they've worked at one. And so by creating a pipeline of people that actually gets to work in the tech industry, you're creating the next generation of founders. And then board members, because boards are woefully undiverse, especially in the private sector, where the progress that has been made in the public sector has not quite reached the same level. And then on the cap table, how do we get more people who have the means, they actually have the capital to invest, but they don't have the access because they're literally left out to actually put that capital to work in ways that can create generational wealth for their communities. That's really what we're trying to do.
That's awesome, thank you. And I want to say this, right? So one of the common themes, so this morning during my DEI panel, I had a woman representing a company called Cascade Engineering. Cascade Engineering was one of the very first companies on the planet to apply to be a certified B Corporation. I had never heard of Cascade Engineering until a good friend of mine wrote a book and was looking for hidden gems, right? When I first saw the name Gaingels in a magazine article, I was dumbstruck because all of my students know I am a voracious reader. And I'd like to think I'm pretty current. I had never heard of Gaingels. I had no idea they existed. And as I got to know Lorenzo, and he explained to me it's exactly the same thing as with Cascade or a lot of other companies that are in this book called the Purposeful 9 Soulful Advantage. They're so busy focused on doing good in the world, they don't invest time in beating their chests or looking for any kind of public celebration or recognition. They're just too focused on doing the hard work that was just described, okay? And I love that. So Reginald, I want to turn it over to you. And as you said, you're 30 years in, and so you've seen a whole lot, and you've described this very episodic journey, this lack of continuity over time. But as you sit here today, you're involved in a number of startup programs at Google for Black founders, Latino founders, and I think you can comment on what Google is trying to do to help to address this problem, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually want to take this 3.0 model here and really talk a little bit about that and look at it from a positive aspects right there. It was 1.0, 2.0, and the opportunity. So instead of looking back and saying what did not happen in the past, especially for Black and Brown individuals, looking into the future, it is super bright, right? It is an opportunity for a new class of individuals that we see here who are going to be able to take advantage of that. who did not have that access in the past, right? So whether it's Industrial Revolution, Black and browns missed that for obvious reasons, and so and then we missed the real estate boom of the 30s and 40s. That's now turning into trillions of dollars of wealth that we did not have access to, and then sort of the Wall Street boom of the 80s as well. But this particular phase, an opportunity now for Black and brown people in particular to take advantage of Venture Capital 3.0 is really tremendous, and so that's what I really want to speak to today. So at Google, in particular, there are a couple of things going on. We have, and I'm involved in a program called Google for Startups. There's one for women, one for Save the Planet, and then also one for Blacks. And so that's one I'm most involved in. And what we're doing there is we have a cohort similar to what your HYBR program, where we're able to actually provide additional level of visibility, a lot more clarity in terms of business plans, and also create a network for those individuals across so that they can be more successful as they go to the next level. And so being able to, and so really my charge to all of you, because I would like this room to be a little bit more diverse as well, is that you become allies, to your classmates, that you become allies to folks in your communities. Even if there's someone that perhaps when you're growing up in your soccer team, reach back to them and say, listen, here's a community, here is an opportunity, here is an area where you can get involved and become and be able to tap into a whole new area of opportunity in the VC 3.0. And so that's really what I want to encourage you to do, some of the work that we're already doing, and I think you as the next generation are really going to be impactful in this space.
And Richie, if you'd followed up, so when it comes to the Google for Startups Black founders, everybody talks about a pipeline problem, right? It's such a convenient thing to say, right? I've got to believe that your experience has been anything but that there's way more talented people applying to the program than there are seats to fill.
Absolutely. So, for example, for the 12 that were chosen as current cohorts, there were actually 300 to 400 applicants for those 12 slots. And not only that, but one of the things that I've learned by going through this, by participating with this program, I really didn't understand to the degree to which so many founders really have to go through the process of pitch competitions, attending conferences, trying to meet individuals like Lorenzo here, and so being able to get into those networks, the social networks that exist. That's where we are still having problems, and the more that we can get to know and connect with each other, that's where we're going to be able to break down that barrier and go to the next level. But so yeah, there are definitely lots of opportunities, but there's still lots of work to be done as well.
All right. So now I want to give Brittany the microphone, and Brittany has a very interesting history. She's from Chicago, but she spent time in a number of startups, including in Seattle, which we all think of as a very progressive place. Certainly, with the Microsoft influence, many startups have been spun out. We've had a Techstars, accelerator there. And so Brittany is going to take us through what I would call the other side of the VC 2.0 experience, which is maybe not everyone benefited equally. And in some instances, they were so aggressively excluded that it made my jaw drop when Brittany had shared some of her stories with me. So Brittany, please what has it been like for you in your journey? 12 years, running product, being part of a number of not just tech startups, but also social impact organizations where there's a lot of equal experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely appreciate your thoughts, Reginald, that in the future it looks bright.
Yeah.
I'm probably a little bit more pessimistic, to be honest with you.
That's great.
Particularly after this last quarter where Adam Newman raised more than 300+ million, more than all Black founders in Q3, which is kind of shitty. I mean, call it spade a spade.
And tell everybody who Adam Newman is, for those who don't know the disgraced Adam Newman, who...
Oh, actually, why don't you give him the background?
So if we know WeWork, and we know the shyster behind WeWork, then you know everything you need to know about Adam Newman, okay? Who Andreessen Horowitz would seem to say, don't worry about that last little
don't look behind
debacle.
The curtain.
Yeah, we like Adam. He's a world-class guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my experience. I left the world of PayPal after spending about 4 years there, and started to get really deep into DEI. And after I kind of had, I would call it almost a come to Jesus moment, I was like, why am I giving all my brilliance to this behemoth when I can spend my days focusing on mission-oriented companies, on populations of people that actually deserve, quite frankly, librarians. So that's when I kind of jumped headfirst into startup, went through Techstars with a company called WeSolve, who had a Black female founder. And so saw kind of on the other side exactly what she was going through all of like the pitch help, seeing all the mentors from Techstars Seattle, all the way to like doing demo day and all this kind of good stuff. And then the stories that I mentioned to Mike was something that we kind of joked about at the time. It was like, we need to write a book about all the like the notes that we kind of get from these meetings. But one, actually a female investor told Stella, who's the CEO, that we should all go on food stamps to help fund our business.
And remind me what year this was.
This is 2017.
2017, not
2018.
1964 in Jackson, Mississippi. Okay.
Exactly, yeah,
Okay,
in
just want to make
Seattle.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, jaw dropped, right?
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, one, how do I compose myself in this meeting
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
like I don't snap and go ham? But then like, how do you take that moving forward, right? Like, I doubt many of these people in this room would ever get that type of comment made to them, and like it was dead serious. It was dead. Like she was really focused. And again, this was also from another female, which also gives it another additional hint of like, what the fuck, right?
You got it.
But that's like one of many things that was my first experience in kind of startup lounge as a part of the founding team. So when I started my stall business, I was like, I can't do this. One, my face is really expressive and really loud. Like, I can't hold my composure as well.
You're not a poker player. Not a professional poker.
I am not a poker
player.
player.
Okay.
And so I wanted to bootstrap. And so that's what I did for about 2 years before I kind of came back into the venture land when one of my good friends, Ossia Bradley, started Kinley. And I came on to become VP of product there.
Yeah, okay. So, and I understand the pessimism, right? Because all we know is what we've experienced, right?
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we chatted about is there are a lot of new, very small, very poorly capitalized, Black-led VC funds, right? A lot of young men and some women who have started funds, right? What's your thoughts on, the challenges they have faced in raising their funds from their limited partners? Is it a struggle right now, as far as you know? I know we talked about maybe you being able to connect with a few of these guys.
Yeah, no, I definitely talked to some friends who are currently raising funds for their own for their VCs.
Yeah.
And to me, it's very similar to the plight of like a Black entrepreneur, right? You kind of get in front of, one, it's like the lack of connections, right?
Yeah.
Of getting in front of the people with the dollars to be able to invest.
Yeah.
But two, then it's just the immediate skepticism, like, do they really need it? Like, are there actually really talented Black founders out there with like compelling ideas? Can they actually, use this money in a way that will make me money at the end of the day? Like, it's a lot of skepticism. Like, for instance, when we were starting Kinley, there was a question, even as the head of product, talking to vendors, they'd be like, why do Black people need their own bank? And I was like, well, one, I'm not going to teach you all of American history, but like you could also just read a little bit, Color of Money by Mercer Baratheron, about how like the Region Bank and how the U.S. actually stole Black people well. But again, I digress, right?
Yeah.
So
You're not here to teach people history. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's
their
not my day job
responsibility.
nor my night job.
Exactly.
So having talked to a couple of friends, it's a lot of that. It's a lot of like the emotional labor that it takes. I went to a conference actually a couple of years ago, and one of the panelists spoke something that was really true to me, that every time I speak, particularly in front of a crowd like this, or in rooms, in corporate rooms, that I have to filter everything I say through two lenses, one as a female and one as a person of color. Because I have to be super careful about the words I speak, not tripping like stereotypes or tropes or breaking, quite frankly, white male fragile egos in a way that shoots me in the foot, And then you have to weigh like, hey, do I really want this racist guy's money in order to benefit the people that I'm trying to work with?
Right.
Or do I stand my ground and be like, fuck you?
Yeah.
But knowing that that's probably going to hurt me in the long term.
So I hope you don't feel that you have to do any. I don't think you've been filtering too much today.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, again, also why
I got
I'm
it.
behind the scenes in product.
I
and
love
not
it. I
CEO.
got it. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. And thank you for being so direct and so truthful. So Charles, you bring a very different, very global perspective. And as you said, right, you've got, you've lived in the corporate world. I'm sure you've seen when you work for a large South Korean company like Samsung or a large U.S. company like GE. I'm sure you experienced, some very typical corporate stuff. Oh, sorry, yeah. And as you said, at some point you decided you were going to bail out and get into the world of impact. And so share your experiences both as a big company guy, working for non-African headquartered domiciled companies as an African man, and what you may have seen there. And as you move now into this new world of social impact, and you're looking to fund some of the projects that you're kicking off, what's your perspective as you look at Africa, as you look at Europe, and even here?
Well, I'm still recovering from your I mean, it's really interesting to see that, you know, it kind of this trend transcends geographies.
Yes.
So, you know, even when you come to Africa, you do still deal with a couple of these biases. I mean, you would probably raise, you know, more money in Kenya than I would.
That's insane.
You know,
That's just insane. Yeah.
So, and I think that the subject of diversity really, you know, needs to be brought closer and closer to the leadership agenda. Because to answer your question, as you know, as I journey through corporate, I witnessed that where the leadership was more in tune with diversity as an asset,
Yes.
the expression of diversity is very different. It actually moves into the core of the business where it becomes a competitive advantage. So I will give you both sides.
Yeah,
So for
please.
example, I worked for a very interesting corporate, and it really came from the top. All right, we want our teams to reflect the marketplace. We want our teams, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, we want our teams internally to reflect the marketplace, because if we're building products for the market, we need people that represent the market in our teams. So when I joined the company and I joined sales, before these kind of announcements were made, it was an all-male 20 team, all male. And we were selling sanitary pads, we were selling diapers. Like, how do you know, but we began to then embrace this mandate that we need to look like the market. So we started hiring women. We started going deeper into the tribes. I'm from Igbo, we were hiring people from Hausa, from the north, from the east, from the west. And we began to see this inclusiveness and thinking, and it began to reflect in our results. You know, so when I stepped out, you know, into another company where it was very different when it was coming from the top, and the tone is different. It reflected in the market. It reflected in our performance.
Right.
So when I came out and became a founder, I told myself from day one that I need to bring inclusion and diversity to the center.
Yes.
Because if we're going to build for the world, which today is already very complicated and
Yes.
extremely connected,
Right.
we need to bring diversity to the center. And I think it's really an asset, you know, and it leads to strategic advantage. That's what I think. Yeah.
So Lorenzo, one thing that we talked about is I'd love to have you highlight, right? So I think about, right, I just saw this recently, that during the COVID relief programs, LGBTQ-led businesses were discriminated against. That they, far fewer of them had their applications accepted. Far fewer of them got the level of money that more quote-unquote traditional businesses got, and far fewer of them got forgiven loans, right? So here we are, we're in 2021, and we have gay rights, marriage, all that stuff, but there's still so much inherent bias. And yet, you know, you have been able to find so many talented founders. So I'd love to hear a few of the portfolio stories that you've
Let me just kind of take a couple of different things.
Yeah.
I want to just comment on something you
Please.
said,
Yeah.
because not only I agree,
Yeah.
but it is remarkable that we're still having these conversations around companies that do better when they build diversity as part of their core, as if it were a news story, right? There is so much data about the public market that has been around for 15, 20 years from Stanford, MIT, Harvard. Like, they've done so much work, and it's right there, black on white, and says, if you take two companies in the public market who are going after the same market, and one is more diverse in their talent, in their governance, they actually outcompete their competition. They perform better to the bottom line. So it's actually just remarkable we're still having the conversation about why companies should be building teams that reflect the reality of their market and the just generally society in which they are. So that, hopefully it's something that we've taken on to try and bring more directly into the private market, because somehow people don't realize that the same actually holds, and governance and diversity of governance and diversity of perspective is equally important in the private market. The second thing is, go back to, because you mentioned something as you were talking. Oh, yes, LGBT-led businesses. Just want to make a sort of an obvious observation, which is the LGBTQ community is obviously cohesive in certain ways and very diverse in other ways. Like, it's a big umbrella that people like me don't have nearly as much problem as they do people of color within the LGBTQ community, trans entrepreneurs within the LGBTQ community, people with gender presentation that are different. And the problem is that because they often and sadly suffer from discrimination and ostracization even within their other kindred communities. So if you have a black LGBTQ entrepreneur, they'll often face discrimination within the black community. Then you basically get to these problems where that inaccessibility of networks, where that problem of knowing someone that can be helpful to you, knowing someone that can make that warm introduction, compounds up. And so when you actually look at the stats of like the variance between how prevalent a certain class of entrepreneur is within the overall entrepreneurship class, and then how much capital they're getting, I mean, we're talking about infinitesimal small percentages. When you take a black trans woman who's starting a business, it's incredibly difficult for them to actually not even convince the investors or the business partners, or even just access them, like even just get to them. So that's really one huge issue for context of why you have those issues of about loans and loan forgiveness, and and obviously we are focused on sort of a portion of the private economy, which is the venture-backed innovation, and a lot of that sort of goes into the small and medium business, sort of businesses that are funded with loan and so on. So I am not an expert in that, but it's just important context. For just to kind of give some, I mean, you were asking me about some experiences and some specific around our portfolio. I've loved sort of seeing companies with diverse founders and entrepreneurs that have been part of our portfolio and have not just executed well, but are continuing to grow into massive companies. It's hard to pick favorites around a portfolio of 1,600 plus companies, but we have some Black-led organizations that are incredibly performing and are raising $50-60 million now at their second round, and one of them is Holler. I don't know if people are familiar with that company, but Travis is a Black founder, has been part of our portfolio for I think 4 years, 3.5 years. There are so many. Is there something that
just maybe, as I said, maybe those that have that have been excluded until they wound up crossing, fortuitously crossing your path and realizing that there are people with a little bit more empathy and
it's hard to know. So I'll tell you a different. I'll give you a different view of this. Gaingels last year put out the first book called The Gaingels 100, is a collection of 100 LGBTQ founders around the world. These are not just Gaingels portfolio companies. They are all over the world. It includes the first public CEO of a company in China who is out. It includes entrepreneurs from Africa. It includes entrepreneurs from all over the world. We worked really hard to make sure that it was a diverse collection across gender presentation, across orientation, across national origin, ethnicity, and so on. And we're just in the process of actually creating our second one. And the amount of stories that I've heard about from these entrepreneurs, especially around the absurdity of the conversations with investors that often kind of minimized the opportunity for almost all of those entrepreneurs. It was always like questions and comments that came from a mindset of scarcity instead of from one of opportunity, right? It's like, it's always your job to prove that your idea is worth investment and worth a big vision, as opposed to kind of being I don't know, just lured into the song of the serial white male straight entrepreneur who can make the case that the world is an oyster and they're just going to go out and build the biggest business possible, and that's why they need $350 million from Andreessen, right? And it's just, I don't know that I have specific stories, but I would say if you're interested in some of those, and if you just go and check out gaingels.com/100. The entire book is online, and you can also order a free copy. And the new book is coming out next Pride Month, so next June, and it'll also be out as a podcast of interviews with all this new cohort of LGBTQ founders.
Okay, so I can't be what I can't see, and so now you can look into this book as a gay founder in China and say, hey, you know what? It's been done. I can do it. Listen. And I want to give a shout out to a woman in the audience, Khadija. Would you just stand up for a second? Yes, Khadija, stand up. Okay, come on. So Khadija is she won the Pan-African Math Olympiad as a young woman. No, I'm going to shout you out. You deserve it. And after coming to the States, she got her MBA at Berkeley. She's working as an AI engineer at Lawrence Livermore Labs. But I had the privilege of meeting Khadija during the Berkeley STEP incubator process. And Khadija is working on a hair robot because black women get their hair braided, obviously, and I think we can see an example of that right here. And Khadija shared the story that it would take her 8 to 10 hours every month to get her hair braided, and she had to take a vacation day from work to have her hair look the way she wanted. And as a math genius and as a techie, she decided she was going to do something about it. And so with one of my wonderful Harvard students, Nioli, I had 5 of my gifted high school Harvard students work with Khadija this summer on supporting her as she thinks about bringing this new invention, this new innovation to the world. So Khadija, it's great to have you here, and I wish you every success. Okay.
Can I? Yeah. First of all, this is an awesome story. But like one of the things that I hear all the time from founders, not just founders of color, but LGBTQ founders who know their communities the best, and are starting and are trying to solve important problems, financially viable companies that can grow into their communities, they're always talking to people who don't understand them. And they're basically saying, well, how big can that be? How many people can possibly need their hair braided? And it's like, you don't understand. Like, there are, millions of people that can actually, and it's really coming also from the fact that we need to create a pipeline of capital allocators. And so people who are actually understanding communities better and are not always only coming from one set of people who can actually allocate that capital. And hopefully we can contribute in different ways, but really not just looking at who the founders are, but also who is providing the capital, who is working at these companies, who is providing governance and advice for them.
Yeah, cool. I know we got but I'm going to just ask 1 or 2 questions, okay? Because this is okay, go ahead, Allie. Allie, why am I not surprised that your hand went up like a rocket ship? Go for it.
Hello,
okay?
My name's Allie. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called EDA, and I'm a proud member of Visible Hands in their second cohort. It's been incredible. We all just spent 5 days together in Tulsa. It was fabulous. But my question is actually around this specific topic of community. So the bulk of my friends who are founders are actually Black and brown founders and female founders. And what we've all come to find, especially in experiences like I was just in, is that you get invited to take a $25,000 check for 6% of your company. Oh, by the way, we need you to take a week off of work to come and be in 1 million photos and videos so that we can plaster you all over the website and social media, so on and so forth. Oh, and our real goal is to get you into another accelerator because we get a kickback from that, and so that's like the end of this, so that you can go give up 6% more of your company and maybe get $50,000 in the next 9 months, which realistically, that's not going to take your business anywhere. Let's call a spade a spade for a second. And so, you might know, so I'm going to like shoot it straight to you all. So my question is, what is it going to, and I'm also a proud LGBTQ plus founder, so I'm aware of that community as well, and the issues that we're facing in that community of fundraising. So my question is, what is it going to take to get from these incubators and accelerator programs with nominal check sizes to a real place where founders of all types and backgrounds are able to raise the money to actually take a business from idea to scale?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, so first of all, you're right, first of all, let's be clear, right? That 98% of all accelerators are not worth their reason for being, okay? Because at the end of the day, it is about world-class mentorship. And there's just not that many world-class mentors to go around, okay? And so to take 6% of your company for, the equivalent of, lunch money, without anything in return is just, it's insane, right? And as a result of that, unfortunately, a lot of people want to be invited to the club and they think, oh my God, I got invited to an accelerator, so of course I'm going to join. No, you've got to be incredibly thoughtful about what you need in return from them, and very few can give it to you, right? Now, there are companies like Visible Hands, and you know Visible Hands because they're an investor in your company, that are opening the pipeline dramatically, right? The aperture has expanded dramatically. And their first check is to mentor people for 14 months, not because they want, to take your equity, but because they really want to create an entirely new VC 3.0 ecosystem, okay? And the good news is there are more and more of these diversity-led mentor capital groups that are not about, I'm looking for that $1 billion sale to Google. No offense to Google, but everybody wants to sell their business to Google or someone like that. We are creating an entirely new generation of entrepreneurs that don't look anything like the classic generation, right? So does that answer your question?
Kind of.
All right, yeah, please go for it. Yeah.
There's always going to be a set of players party that are ultimately acting in a predatory way, which that sounds like,
And performative.
and performative, like sort of taking a lot and not giving much. And it's also, one has to recognize that there's always going to be a scarcity sort of issue. And so even when you look within certain communities, there's going to be ways in which there's a selection process, and some are going to make it, and some are going to get access to the best incubators, accelerators, and so on. But there's definitely are parties that will be more helpful than the ones that you, not to just continue to talk about my experience, but I mentioned Start Out as having an accelerator incubator that takes zero equity, doesn't take anything. Also doesn't have the ability to contribute capital, but will contribute time, space, mentorship, advice, and it has helped drastically bring these companies in front of other investors. The most important thing you can do, for example, even from an investor like Gaingels, where we have a very early stage program that invests pretty small checks, typically less than $100,000 in about 200 companies per year, and we write the check. And then those companies are on the same footing as every other portfolio companies in our portfolio when it comes to our ability to help them with not just advice and mentorship, but introductions to other investors. And that's the biggest thing that you can actually do at that stage, is like, how do you get that warm introduction, that connection that you on your own, because your lack of access, because the social networks in which you can't get to, so that you can get the check from the VC fund that can write $100, $200, $500, $1 million check, and then go on. There's always going to be a few. We're never going to be at the point where everyone who wants to start a company is going to get that capital, right? So there's going to be a selection process. What we're trying to do is to make sure that there's not systematic inequality of access for an entire class of people that is not dependent on their merit and on their talent.
All right. So I think, unless this lovely young lady is going to kill me, I think, so I don't want to throw us into a really, bad place on the schedule. So you tell me, if we need to cut it off now, we'll cut it off.
You can do a question in 3 minutes.
Can we do a quick question?
Yeah, real quick.
All right, let me give you this. Okay.
First of all, thank you for putting this together. My name is Alex Ontiveros. Been here in the Valley for a long time. An award-winning community leader, award-winning filmmaker, formerly in human resources. My question is, why is it that when it comes to diversity, it's a white and black issue? There's other communities.
Oh, no.
So that's the question.
I will tell you that, and I was actually going to make this statement before we started, we tried about 20 Latino and Latina VCs. One of them was actually going to come and then canceled.
But that's just here, though.
What's that?
I'm talking in general.
Okay, so why is it white and black?
Yeah, why is it, it appears to me, I've been paying attention to the space since the
Yeah.
90s.
Okay.
It's a black and white issue. It's like, why is it like black focus when there's another segment
Oh.
that's relatively larger?
I don't think it is, right?
No,
Which is why Lorenzo's here. And I wanted to include Latino, Latina as well, right? So I don't at all believe it's black and white. I believe it's much broader than that.
There's a
Yeah.
real lack of access
Yeah.
for Latino entrepreneur,
Yeah.
for other communities, ethnicities that go beyond the black community. There's
Yeah.
a real lack of access, a real lack of, people were saying it before this panel, only 3%, I think someone said.
Yeah, 2% actually, it's 2%, yeah.
Participation in the
Yeah.
tech industry, and we need to fix it. We need to fix it in a lot of different ways, including providing a real pipeline for talent to access.
Yeah.
I've been hearing the pipeline thing since the 90s.
Oh, yeah, we
So
all
what
have.
we do, I mean, we try and do what we can, but what we do, we actually go to schools. Our staff actually goes to underrepresented, historically black and brown colleges where there's high enrollment, and we promote jobs at our portfolio companies. We actually literally go out there and say, hey, all of these companies in our portfolio want to hire. And often kids at these schools, they don't even know that this is a sector of the industry that is an opportunity and open for them. They just don't. They don't know it from their families, they don't know it from their schools. So the little bit that we can do is we go to schools where there's more of that talent and we tell them, hey, this is an open type of jobs that is open to you. These companies actually want to hire you. You just need to go and apply and show up. And we've actually had really demonstrable sort of effort in kind of getting new applicants and new people. We only started this less than a year ago, but it's really one of the ways in which we can start to make change. But yeah, I'm certainly it's not a problem that is either black or white. It's much broader.
Yeah, and the reason that I met Brittany is because one of the people we reached out to is one of the founders of the Latin VC community. And she just gave birth literally last week. And Brittany is actually out here to be with her as she spends time with her in the first 2 weeks post-birth. And it was that connection, right? But I will tell you, we aggressively reached out. I had a young Latino man on our volunteer team that was making call after call after call. I got on the phone with a few people, and for a variety of reasons, it just didn't work out, but we tried.
Well, next time you try, you can give me a call.
Well, then let me have your contact information, and we will. Okay, awesome. I want to thank the audience for your engagement. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Reginald. I want to really thank Lorenzo for coming all the way from New York just for the day. I want to thank Brittany for speaking her truth so eloquently and with a couple of very emphatic English colloquialisms that just put a point on everything. And I want to thank Charles for sharing his perspective as well. Thank you all for allowing us to have this panel.